Hi everyone, welcome back. So far, we've been focusing on the data and domain layers. We built our data sources, models, entities, repositories, and use cases. Now it's finally time to move on the presentation layer. And to manage the state of our app in this layer, we're going to use one of the most popular packages in the Flutter world, Flutter BLoC. Before jumping into BLoC, let's quickly understand what state management even means. In Flutter, your UI is just widgets, and widgets rebuild every time something changes. But where do we keep the data that changes? That's what we call the state. For example, in a counter app, the current number is the state. In a news app, the list of articles, the loading state, or even an error message are all part of the state. So, state management is just about storing that data somewhere, updating it when something happens, and rebuilding the UI when the data changes. Okay, now let's talk about BLoC state management. BLoC means business logic component. That sounds complicated, but here's the simple idea. We don't want to mix our UI code with our logic. Normally in Flutter, you might use setState and put all the logic directly inside your widget. That works for small apps, but for bigger apps, it quickly gets messy. With BLoC, we move all the logic into a separate class, either a BLoC or a Cubit, and this class decides what happens, and the UI just shows the result. So, remember it like this. The UI is dumb. It only listens. And the BLoC is smart. It does the thinking. The Flutter BLoC package gives us two main tools, Cubit and BLoC. Cubit is the simpler version. You directly call methods and emit new states. But BLoC is a bit more advanced. It uses events and states. You add an event, the BLoC receives it, does some logic, and then emits a state. Think of it like this. If you just did something simple, like incrementing a counter or toggling a theme, Cubit is perfect. If you need to handle more complex flows, like user authentication or paginated news fetching, BLoC with events and states is a better fit. Okay, before we start coding, let me explain something. In this episode, we're going to step away from our main project for a moment. I've created a brand new Flutter project, just a clean one, so we can practice. And for this practice, we'll use the default counter app that Flutter gives us. We're going to replace the old set-state logic with a Cubit, so you can clearly see how state management works in action. Now let's add the Flutter BLoC package to our project. You can see the package is added here. Perfect. Now we're ready to code. Now we add the BLoC folder to the lib directory. Keep in mind, this project is only for learning purposes, and we are not using any specific architecture in it. Inside the BLoC folder, let's create a new file called countercubit.dart. First, I create a class called countercubit that extends from Cubit with type int. So why int? Well, think about Flutter's default counter app. It just shows a number on the screen. That number is an integer. So here, the Cubit's job is to manage an integer value that represents our counter. Therefore, what we're really doing here is specifying the type of data that will change and cause the UI to update. And here, this is an integer. Now let's add our constructor. Here I call super with 0, which means I'm setting the initial state to 0. Every qubit needs an initial state. You always have to give it a starting value. So in our case, the counter starts at 0, and it will stay 0 until I call emit with a new number. Okay, now let's create a method that adds 1 to our counter every time we call it. I'll name it increment. For its body, I write emit, and inside the emit, I add 1 to our state. Remember, state is just our current counter value. So if the counter is 4, state plus 1 becomes 5. When we call emit, the qubit sends out this new value and the UI will update to show 5. That's it. Now let's open main.dart and connect this qubit to our UI. First, I remove the unnecessary parts of our material app. For the home, I'm not directly giving a widget like my homepage. Instead, I wrap it with a BLoC provider. BLoC provider provides an instance of our counter qubit to all widgets below it in the widget tree. So in the create parameter, I return a counter qubit. This means whenever the app runs, a fresh counter qubit will be created. And then I set the child to counter view. Now counter view and any widget inside it can access this qubit and listen to changes in its state. In short, BLoC provider is how we inject our qubit into the widget tree, so the UI and logic can talk to each other. Now let's replace my homepage with counter view and convert it to a stateless widget, because we don't need to use the default state management of Flutter anymore. We can do the state management using BLoC and Cubit now. And also, it's no longer necessary to include the title in the constructor. We will also delete this variable and method because we have them in our qubit. Let's choose a title for our app. I'll remove these default comments. This text is what we want to change whenever the counter updates. So we need to put it inside a BLoC builder. Here we should write the type of our qubit, counter qubit, and here the type of our state, which is integer here, which is our counter values type. The builder gives us context and count, which is the current state. Inside the builder, we return a text widget showing count. Now, whenever the qubit emits a new number, this text will automatically update. That's why we wrap it with BLoC builder. So the UI reacts to the qubit's state change. Next, let's handle the button that changes the counter. Here, I start with a lambda function, or an anonymous function. It tells Flutter, run the code on the right only when this button is pressed, not right now. Next, I type context. This is the widget's context, which gives access to the widget tree and all the providers about this widget. Then I call read method with our qubit type, which is counter qubit. This is how we get the current instance of our qubit from the BLoC provider. So now we have access to the counter qubit methods and its state. Finally, we can simply call the increment method that we defined in counter qubit that increases the counter by 1 and emits the new state. This triggers BLoC builder to rebuild the UI with the updated counter value. Okay, now that we have everything set up, let's run the app and see it in action. Okay, and here we are. The counter starts at 0. Every time I press the plus button, the number increases by 1. The UI updates automatically because the BLoC builder listens to the qubit's state changes. As an exercise, you can try adding the decrement method yourself to decrease the counter. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching and see you in the next episode.